Welcome Shannon Muehlberg to our conversation today. Thank you, Shannon, so much for joining me and being willing to talk with me. You've been working with the elementary school there in Isanti for, I want to say 3 years now. Is that about right?
I'm actually not a licensed teacher.
No.
So I work with behaviors. And so I have a different role, a support role in the school. I work to support our teachers when they have some behavior issues that arise in their class. And I work closely with our principal and our school counselor.
Right.
So, but yes, our school is closed. And so we've been there. It's weird. It's so quiet. And we've been trying to navigate this whole new world of distance learning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But you've been doing like probably an incredible amount of support for the teachers since the whole school shut down and everything.
Especially for my principal. Especially for my principal.
So you're ministering to your kids, to your family, trying to keep things positive and do the best with what you've got, as well as finding a new way to work at your job and support the teachers who are supporting the students while they're working at home. Well, I just want to ask a quick question before we dive into our conversation today about stories about God's love from the scriptures. And that is just like, how has God been carrying you so far through everything that you're doing right now since this whole thing's been happening?
I feel like I've had a lot of peace in this. I really have enjoyed some of the quiet and the taking a step back from a lot of the busyness of life. And I know that that's it's for a very sad reason that we do that. And so I say that knowing that there are also some that are taking that step back and it's very harmful to them. But in the quiet, in the downtime, in the times when I'm not running here or there or helping with, church Wednesday nights or whatever, I really found some time to connect and to read my Bible and to read some good books and to find encouragement in ways that I think sometimes leading up to this, I haven't really taken the time to do.
Yeah, it's been one of these times where I think a lot of people are really trying to focus on things in a more spiritual way, right? Because it's very overwhelming. I mean, there's just a lot of levels to what we're going through.
Right. Not only is there so many unknowns in my own life, but in everyone in my household and all of those around us, everyone we run into in the community, for everyone, there's just this high level of anxiety and unknowns and uncertainty.
And so that's why we're doing what we're doing right now, this conversation you and I are having, because, I really think that people are looking to lighten the load. And one of the things I think, that Jesus says, he says, come to me, you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And right now, I mean, going shopping, right? I just went shopping earlier this morning, for the week. And so I did my big outdoor to the necessary shopping trip store thing. And it's exhausting because it's all so different. And there's like this big routine now that we go through. And like, I'm constantly thinking about not touching my face and all of that stuff. And then bringing things to the house and
bringing my hand sanitizer.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And then, just the whole thing. But Jesus says, those who are weary and heavy burdened, please come to me and I will give you rest. Right. Mm-hmm. And he says, that's what I think people are looking for, is to find that rest with God, with Jesus. And so that's why I wanted to explore these stories, these passages of scripture in the Bible, because they really talk about how much God loves us, his regard for us, who we are in the world just because of who we are, just because of who he is.
Because now, many of our extras are stripped down. They're not there. So, for me, I've struggled with doing things to feel like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm checking off these things on my list. So, that means I'm good enough, right? And when all of that is taken away, what do we do? What do we have left? So it's really changed our focus to a more personal faith, a personal focus on Jesus.
So the level of activity has way gone down in a sense, right? But then we find ourselves doing a whole lot more of trying to connect with each other in really intentional ways.
Right.
You're one of our elders at the church. You've been elder at our church for, boy, I want to say like the past 6 or 7 years. Is that
I
about
think
right?
something like that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and it's been awesome to work with you on a lot of projects, like Vacation Bible School, women's ministries, and now in a support role for new leaders for our church, and also just for our sisterhood of churches. So you've been doing that a lot, and that's a lot of activity in and of itself. All right. So I mean, now that kind of thing has taken a pause. All
Right.
the events and getting ready for things, planning meetings, and so on. I mean, we're doing them a little bit differently now. But you are a very active person in our church. Yeah, sometimes it can be easy to really like I don't know, start to approach our spiritual relationship with Jesus as we're doing all these busy things. You
Right.
know, like that becomes kind of like our devotional activity,
Hmm.
our spiritual life.
Right.
And now this has happened, and so now it's like, well, it looks different now. What is
Right.
the essence of my spiritual life, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think these stories really address the essence of our spiritual life and our connection with God in some pretty powerful ways. And so one of those stories is in Luke chapter 7.
This story means a lot, a tremendous amount to me. It's one of my favorite Bible stories. And I think the reason why is because um, her appearance is not a surprise to Jesus. And he sees her from the very beginning. And I think that the history behind the story, too, is important. I almost feel like I can't explain it without reading the story. I'm sure many people are familiar with it. But she comes to uninvited to this place, and I am sure that she feels unworthy, and she um, kind of ducks in and is in a very uh, humble circumstance, hiding herself behind Jesus, positioning herself in just a very humble, low place. And her love of Jesus and appreciation of his forgiveness in her life is what has compelled her to show up here and to do these things. And I just think it's so amazingly brave that she listened to that conviction in her heart to go and do this, and that she walked in and presented herself in this humble place and not really knowing what would happen. You know, she's at the house of a Pharisee, and she could have easily been thrown out. I'm sure, um, she had already experienced Jesus and his forgiveness of her sins. And so she knew that his treatment of her, I think, would be good. But there were so many unknowns. How it relates to me in my own life, I can relate to this woman. I can relate to that place of being and feeling so completely sinful and unworthy, and then experiencing the forgiveness of God, and almost feeling like if I didn't do something about it, to show him my appreciation, that like it just had to happen because I just felt like it was coming out of me, you know?
Right. One of the things I love about the stories in the Bible, especially in the Gospels as they're told, is how the little details jump out at the story and communicate some really powerful things. So I think, why don't we dive into the story here?
Yeah.
It begins with in Luke chapter 7, verse 36, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. So this isn't, necessarily, like in our day and age right now, it's not something that sounds socially appropriate. I mean,
Right.
we kind of have to enter back into a little bit about what it was like to go into somebody's home and eat in this culture at that time. But right, Jesus is going to a Pharisee's house. That's how it starts out.
Right.
And so this Pharisee and a sinful woman, those are the two important people in the story. And I mean, there couldn't really be any bigger of a contrast, maybe.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Like what are some of those ways that they're contrasted, do you think?
Well, um, if we take other areas of the Bible and pull those in, there's much um, information that says that this is the same woman who was brought out to the by the Pharisees to Jesus.
And so you're thinking of, when the woman who was caught in adultery
Right.
was drugged out of, like, she was uh people were in waiting for, like, she was baited into a situation. Then
Right.
she was pulled out of that situation through the streets
Right.
to uh basically put on a show and see if they could back Jesus into a corner, whether they should stone this woman or not.
Right.
Okay, so this would be Mary Magdalene.
Right.
And these are all different episodes of her life and coming to Jesus.
Right. Regardless, I think we know that this woman is sinful and her past is it's scandalous. That the fact that she shows up there, the fact that she comes in, the fact that she presents herself to Jesus and that she's actually touching him, the fact that her hair is down. There's so many cultural things. Women were not supposed to wear their hair down. They were only supposed to take their hair down for their husbands. I mean, there's so many scandalous things in here. And then we have the contradiction of the Pharisee, who is the rule following, straight line. Why did he invite Jesus to his house in the first place? Was he drawn to him as savior, or what was his motivations there? Maybe just to present to him his home and the proper welcoming of a potential teacher or someone that he respected his teaching.
Right. There's a parallel story told in the Gospel of John, right, where
Right.
it says that this takes place in the town of Bethany, and that Mary Magdalene is definitely the woman. The woman's not named here in this particular version that Luke tells, but he names the Pharisee. The guy's name is Simon, right?
Right.
And then in John leaves out completely any mention of whose house it is. It doesn't. It's just in a certain house this happened, and
Right.
so the Pharisee part and Simon and all that's totally disregarded in John. And so, like, Luke and John are like focusing on kind of different details here, right?
Right.
But Luke is definitely focusing on the woman in contrast to the host, right?
Right.
He gives details about both of these people.
I just read the story for something else in Matthew 26, starting at verse 6, where it's the same or a similar story about Jesus being anointed at Bethany. And it says, in the home of a man known as Simon the leper, which kind of adds a whole new dimension to this character, Simon the Pharisee, who was a leper and now is not.
In each of those stories, God shows nuances of how much he loves all of us. So there's not just this sinful woman, but there's also Simon the Pharisee, that Jesus is trying to reach both of them, right?
Absolutely.
And so why did this Pharisee invite Jesus to his home? Was he trying to show off, or was he trying to show gratitude for Jesus too, like in the story with Matthew?
Right. Was he the one? Did he have leprosy? Was he healed? He was a leper. Now he's healed. Is he inviting Jesus to thank him for his healing and the restoration of his position as a Pharisee? Because of course, if he is a leper, he is not a Pharisee.
Right. Yeah.
he is cast out and away and considered unclean.
He's restored to his former way of life, his status, his, the club that he belongs to.
Right.
To be a Pharisee is a pretty awesome thing historically. But in the
Mm-hmm.
Bible, there's some negativity
Negativity.
associated with it
Oh yeah.
because of a sense of self-righteousness, right? This, like, of
Right.
course God accepts me, right?
Right. I know the law, and I'm the one that teaches everyone else how to follow it. And I'm the one that defines what it is. If you have any questions, just come to me and I'll tell you how not to travel too far on the Sabbath, how not to work on the Sabbath, what is acceptable and not acceptable. They're kind of the determiners of that.
When something happens in your life that you feel like, man, God, why is this happening to me? Here I am, I'm trusting you, I'm serving you, I'm giving my life to you, my all to you and everything. And then boom, this happens. Like, maybe that was Simon's perspective as a Pharisee. He was like, how could I get leprosy?
Right.
God, I mean, maybe he felt judged by God, but then he's healed by Jesus. And maybe he was like, well, if anyone in this world deserves it, it's me, the Pharisee.
Right. No, I think that comes out in the story a little bit, because after she does this, pours out the alabaster jar, pours out the perfume, she's wiping his feet with her hair. Simon has a thought, and I love how Jesus addresses his thoughts and not his actual words, because I think that it's just a helpful thought process for me to remember to check my thoughts even.
Yeah, verse 39,
Verse
right?
39, yes, when the Pharisee who invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner.
Right.
So he, had the right to look at her and know that she's a sinner, that kind of self.
He felt like he had that right,
Oh yeah, that's
like
what he
he
thought.
could sit in a position of judgment. And here he is,
Mhm.
perhaps having been healed of something himself that socially ostracized him and threatened everything
Right.
that he was about, like stripped him of his identity. But then he was restored, and now he's like sitting in judgment with her, maybe because he's like, well, I deserved the healing and miracle that I got in my life, but what about her? Probably
Right.
not. I mean, I was a righteous person before I got sick. What was she doing? Why would she? What does she get to be restored?
And I think too, there's like a moment in the story where he actually questions Jesus's divinity. I think, even because he's thinking to himself, if he knew what kind of woman this is,
Right.
this is the man that healed him of leprosy, obviously is divine, performing miraculous
Yeah.
actions, right?
Yeah.
But he's questioning if he knew, is he? And I guess one of my favorite parts of the story is that Jesus ends up addressing both of them in a way that saves. It's not really shaming to either one.
Yeah.
It just kind of restores both of them to that place of, okay, let me just explain this to you. And I'm going to let your reasoning as a Pharisee, Simon, I'm going to let your reasoning think this through,
Right.
because I'm going to tell you a story of why she deserves to be here. And the fact that he addresses his thoughts is just like that exclamation point of, whoa, 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 buddy. This is not your place. I'm going to tell you what you're thinking, and I'm going to address the doubts that you have in your mind about my divinity and about her worthiness to even be here.
Simon has saved some embarrassment because Jesus just starts talking, and they don't really understand why or what the motivation is or anything like that. But Simon, he's like, oh, but no one else. But Jesus has given him some cover, and it's like this, like Luke is saying, here are two people who couldn't be more different from each other, right?
Mhm.
You got a Pharisee man, right? And you have a woman who has lived a sinful life in the same town. So, like, both their stories are known in the community, right? And so
Right.
they're set at total opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
Right.
But the thing that evidently made them the same was their own illnesses and things that ways in which they've been brought low in life, you know.
Right.
And Jesus comes into their lives at that point in time for both of them and does the work of restoration. But what's kind of crazy is that Simon the Pharisee, he experiences this restoration, but the whole process of him getting sick and then getting healed, when we come to him in this story, he's still not getting it. Like he hasn't experienced
Right.
that level of change of God's grace in his life, and he's still struggling with that. But now this story is like that moment for him, right? It's not
Yes.
the
Yeah.
not the getting sick that humbled him, or the getting better, but it's like this moment.
Right. And even for the people that are there witnessing the events play out, because I'm guessing that Simon is probably not the only one of the Pharisees there, of the guests there, who had that same knowledge of the woman's sinful past, and the fact that the fact that she was even there was so scandalous.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking a little bit about this too, like from Simon's perspective as a Pharisee, like to invite Jesus into your home. Like when you know that the club that you belong to right now, they're pretty antagonistic towards Jesus, right?
Oh yeah.
So like he's stepping out in a pretty big way. I wonder, if that's like something that drives his judgmental thought at that
Hmm.
point in time. Like he's like thinking so much about his own public image,
Right.
and like equating his self-image with how other people see him,
Right.
that's one
And
of the
he
things driving his judgment.
right. And he also, I think, obviously he wants the people that he's invited to know Jesus the way he did, or the way he experienced Jesus. There's always, or I think that there's obviously some kind of value in that. He wants them to know and to see this guy that healed him.
The way that Luke tells it is like Mary, who is not named in the story, but she doesn't belong there. She shouldn't have access to this party or to this dinner, and she's not
Right.
on the invite list. But she finds a way to come in anyway. She's so completely focused on Jesus
Mm-hmm.
here in the setting that maybe she's just like, this is the one shot that I have.
And maybe this is just my own interpretation, but it almost feels to me, I get a sense that it's more that she kind of snuck in the back door and is hiding behind Jesus and is crouching low and is trying to be unnoticed, except for the fact that she has this alabaster jar filled with perfume. Then once that's broken open, there's no hiding.
I mean, she enters into the room and people are like freezing. All the conversation dies down. She cracks open that jar. The perfume just fills the house, and she starts to touch his feet and to, rub the oil in, and it's all kinds of crazy. From Simon's perspective, he's like, "What's happening here?" And then everyone's like looking to Jesus now,
Yeah.
like, what is he going to do, right?
I don't want to overlook the fact that this woman is sobbing. She's wetting his feet with her tears. Like, I mean, I'm a crier. I cry all the time at Hallmark commercials and things that most people don't even cry about. I read this story and I cry almost every time. I cry all the time. But when I cry, I'm wiping off my tears a little bit and I'm moving on. I don't know that in my life I've ever been to a point where I'm crying so hard that I'm able to wet something like someone's feet with my tears, where I would feel the need to wipe it up, you know? So I think that the high emotion that she brings to this, in the fact that she's obviously so moved emotionally, is something that Jesus takes notice of right away.
Yeah. Like he zeroes in on what's going on with her.
Right. So he understands from the get-go. Well, he knows our hearts no matter what, but he also can see physically that this woman is so filled overwhelmingly with gratitude for her Savior and for what he's done for her. And we read that later on in the story, that she just can't stop. It's just pouring out. It kind of reminds me of that little verse that says, if we didn't say it, the rocks would cry out. That's how she feels. Like, I just have to show this man what his forgiveness, what his salvation has done for me.
Jesus, he publicly defends, he doesn't like publicly shame Simon. He addresses his thoughts, but he publicly defends her and says things that honor her and supports her and ministers to her, right?
Right. She could have easily walked out of there as a fool, known as a fool. The foolish woman. We could be reading this with a different title. The foolish woman who came and made a fool out of herself in front of Jesus and a bunch of religious leaders, and yet that's not the focus of this story. Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. And they'll remember this is after Simon thought about the woman. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled." And then Jesus says, "You have judged correctly." I love that because Jesus turns to Simon, says, "Okay, buddy, you're a Pharisee. You have the job of interpreting stories. So I'm going to turn to you and I'm going to get your wisdom on this story that I'm going to tell you." Mm-hmm. And so Simon, I imagine, is listening to the story and he is thinking, oh, Jesus is putting me in that position of leadership, of being able to interpret a story and judge correctly. And Jesus says that you've judged correctly. And then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon. So he turns towards the woman to show Simon, I'm talking about her. That's who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then he says, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." And the other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" And Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace."
That really informs a lot of why she comes to this party, right? To see Jesus, because she needs him to tell her something.
Right.
Crucial and essential to her heart. Was she already grateful for that? The sense of being restored and healed and everything, and for being forgiven and accepted by him. So that's why she comes, right? But then he says it again to her, right? He gives her that extra assurance. Right. But now it's in front of all of these people.
He gives it in front of everybody though. Like, I'm making a public declaration here. She already had experienced his forgiveness, right? And the story says that, but he says to everybody, okay, this woman is forgiven. So she leaves there and she's been restored to her place in all of their eyes, and Simon is still able to keep his, okay, I'm a Pharisee, I judge that story right, Mm-hmm. So I love how Jesus helps them both to be restored.
Yeah. And this is a real moment of grace for both of them. I mean,
Absolutely.
Simon needs a little bit of social protection, maybe, uh, in order to fully receive the message for himself. And
Right.
this woman, she needs social protection also,
Yes.
uh, in order to fully receive what Jesus says to her in the most powerful way, you know, like a
Right.
public proclamation. Like Jesus is like, I'm not ashamed of who hears this. This woman right here, she is forgiven, and her love for God is huge, you know. And when I think about that, like the whole point of that little story he told to Simon is like, okay, so which of these people are going to love God more, you know?
Right.
And like that's the whole point of our spiritual lives, of who we are, right?
Right.
How much do we love God?
Right.
And
What I love is, and I feel like this is why I relate to this story so much, is because as we look in the Bible, in other versions, in the NLT and the NASB, I think in the New King James, the very following passage um, is is called Many Women Follow Jesus, and Mary is listed in there. And so um, what makes me so like, I feel like he restored her, and then she left there, and she um told her story. I have to imagine that the women that are listed in that following passage, Joanna, and Mary Magdalene is listed specifically, and Susanna and the other women. I mean, women talk, and when something like this happens, you know, what did she do? Did she leave there and just go and hover into a corner? Did she return to sin? No. She went and she told the women, and many women follow Jesus and become his supporters, his disciples. They follow him. They participate in every aspect of ministry from there on.
how she leaves this room at the
Right.
end of the story, I can only picture her one way, you know, and that's walking with her head high
Yes.
and feeling free without having to care about what anybody else thinks right now.
Right.
She, all that matters to her is what Jesus has said.
Right. And I'm sure you've been at that place too, and I hope that everyone has, but that place with Jesus where you've experienced that forgiveness and you feel so overwhelmed with it that you just have to do something with it,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. And it can be different for everyone, but for Mary, for this sinful woman, that looked like going and starting something with other women. You know, we're going to make some followers of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And then, you know, like there's nobody that can't be reached by his love. You know,
Yep. Yeah.
there's not a single one of us that we can't relate to now, because
Right.
you know, our stories are all different in details and
Hmm.
the ways in which we've been brought low, but the one who brings us high, who lifts us up, who restores our hearts, he's the one and the same. And he is his love is powerful for anybody to be lifted back up again.
Right.
Well, so I have a question for you here. So how have you seen God express this same love in your life?
I have a sinful past. I know many of us do. I can relate to her story in a way, maybe not specifically the same, but I think we can put any sin into in that fill in the blank, you know, um, and the comfort that I receive when I read and learn of his acceptance of her and his restoration of her. And it creates in me a similar response when I associate, or when I think of my own journey, my own life. And I feel such a closeness to her and her story, because I feel like as I have processed through my own yuck and guilt and shame, and uh, continually brought that to Jesus, there has been an experience of such amazing love that I get from him, that I read of him, that I experience and explore and discover about his character all the time, that just adds to the level of love that I have in my own heart for him. And it I think that sometimes we just can't help but it just comes out of us, you know. um and I know people like this too, that have experienced that transforming love of Jesus. And when you knew them before and you know them now, it's the most beautiful, beautiful thing to see how God has completely changed their story, and the impact that they can have on a life now, or on others now, is just tremendous.
And you just get to see how people develop over such a long range of time, and they get to see you too, you know. So
Right.
I mean, like when you're in those kinds of long relationships, you don't really get to like put on a face and sell yourself. People know the real you, you know, and
Right.
you know the realness of other people. And um you know, so when you were saying like, well, you know, I've had a sinful life in the past, or sinful past too, and that's my story also. I think that's all of our stories, right? But I mean,
Right.
I have a sinful present, you know. I mean, that's
Right.
that's the reality
Me
of living in
too.
this world. The first people who will tell you that are the people who know me the longest and know me the most.
Yes.
And yet the thing is that with that kind of knowledge that you have of other people, and they're allowed to have of you, um, that's where it really, you know, it's not about, you know, like how righteous can I be, like behaviors, or, you know, doing the right things, or talking the right time. I don't know, you know, it's more about like what's genuine, what is transparently real. um what, you know, do I love Jesus? What is the genuine level of my love for God? I think that's where, you know, hopefully people in my life are say, yeah, it's there. It's definitely genuine. It's definitely there. Because I know I can say that about other people that I know, that it's totally
Right.
real. You know, you know, their hearts need Jesus, you know,
Yeah.
and the gratitude and the sincerity, it's like so real. I can feel it, you know, I can sense it, and I can see it in so many ways. It's hard maybe, you know, for me to say that about myself, but I can definitely
Right.
say that about a lot of other people in my life.
Right. That's the beauty of God's love. God sent Jesus to go through this world and experience all of these things and live life with these crazy people who do crazy things and stupid things and keep sinning or keep returning to their yuck, and then they go back to him and they make it right. Or that, you know, he is he's called out even beforehand that they're going to make huge mistakes, and then you're going to come back to me, and then let's do this right the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time. I love that Jesus is always approachable, always approachable. And that's clear in the Bible. That's clear in Jesus's life, especially, that
Right.
he's always approachable with our big emotions, with our sobbing to the point where we're going to soak his feet up, with our judgmental thoughts, all of that. He's always approachable.
Yeah. You know, like even in this story, I mean, like Jesus is in a situation where she could be like, well, he's not really approachable right now. You know, I really shouldn't, uh, I should
Oh,
wait
he's
for him to
busy.
leave the house or something like that.
This
Um,
might be kind of awkward.
right, exactly. She's like thinking, I've got to do this for him now. It's like she
Yeah.
wanted to make a public statement about Jesus too, you know? Like, this is how important he is to me. And I will cross any social barrier that's in front of me in order to be with him and to show him how much he like if, for her doing it in this situation would show him it's more than just the perfume on his feet. It's more than just the tears of gratitude. It's that she would do this now. You know what I mean? And there's this huge trust there that Jesus is not going to
let her down.
Right. That he'll receive her.
Feel shame, send her away. Right. And that trust is there. I mean, when we think of her past, if there were ever a time when he had, a situation to send her away or to, condemn her, it's where she came from when she's caught in that act of adultery. So I think that there's also a level of trust there that her offering will be accepted by him.
She's like thinking, Jesus has already seen me at my worst.
Yeah, right.
And at my worst, that's when he came into my life. That's when he showed me the grace. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, how much worse could this situation be?
Right. And I love that thought because it applies to all of us. Yeah. It just is one of those like points where we can, let's remember Jesus has already seen us at our worst, and so we know that he's always approachable.
Right. Absolutely.
His love is always there. Early on, in my own faith, I helped to start something called Mothers of Preschoolers, a MOPS group. And I just remember feeling so new in my own Christian faith. And a friend approached me and asked if I would be willing to help her lead it out and to start the ministry. And I remember feeling so completely scared and unqualified. I mean, I'd known Jesus well on and off. I mean, in my childhood, I knew who Jesus was. And I had heard all sorts of Bible stories. But as an adult, I was baptized in 2000. So that was when I really accepted Jesus. And this was like 2004 or 5. I'm a baby Christian, and yet I've got a friend who's also a baby Christian, and we're both shaken in our boots. But there was something about this joining together and connecting other people and sharing our common experiences that I just felt like God was telling me, you need to do this. You need to tell about your own experiences and help other people to be brave and do the same thing. And so my friend Jenny and I did that. And it was super scary to be able to go in front of a group of people who didn't really know us very well and be able to share something vulnerable, like a struggle that we had, something that that God is teaching us. It's not really accepted in our culture to just bear it all out there, and of course we had some boundaries. I mean, we didn't give all the juicy details, but I just remember feeling so like compelled by Jesus to tell my story, to tell some of my own experience. And when we started to do that, I feel like he showed us so many other people that were encouraged by saying, hey, me too, I went through that. Oh, that happened to me too. Let's talk about this. And so I realized that in doing that, it healed in me something or it just like solidified something in me that I'd always felt, which is I always feel so uncomfortable with like pleasantries and, oh, hi, how are you? Happy Sabbath, and oh, I'm doing well, how are you? And just not, I don't know, small talk. Small talk makes me want to like crawl up a wall. I feel so uncomfortable. I feel so impersonal. But when I get to share some of my experience and hear some of someone else's experience, that shared stuff where we get to experience connection, it's like I feel like that is like my singing, how you're singing. I feel like that's how I get to express to God um, how much I love him and how much he's done for me, you know?
Well, I just want to thank you so much for um, talking with me today about this story and all the different ways it gets told in the Gospels, especially here in Luke chapter 7, and for what you're doing, not only for, our church family, but also for your colleagues, your teachers, and the students that work in your school, and how important that is right now with this social distancing and stay at home and weird home education that everyone is having to do, and how you're supporting your teachers and your students to do that. That's awesome that you're able to continue doing that work. And most importantly, thank you so much for being who you are to my wife and I, to our family. And I love your guys' family and your kids, and how you've been part of our church family. It's been such an amazing journey so far. And it's been really cool to see how God has continued to lead you in ministry and in leadership, and how that's just going to continue to take off, and who knows how many ways. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me today.
Thank you. It's been fun.
I look forward to it again.